Just recorded the Bigger Pockets episode for their main podcast. It's supposed to air on December the 1st. So pretty excited about that. It's kind of a full circle moment for me because somebody introduced me to that podcast about 4 years ago, and that's what introduced me to a lot of these concepts that I'm going to go over and really showed me what was possible and inspired me. So if you don't know, Bigger Pockets is that podcast is the largest real estate podcast on the planet, and they often rank up to the top 5 business podcasts in the world as well. So it's a big deal. It was a whole bit of production that went on for them to get it done, but it was an absolute honor, and I can't wait for it to air and everybody can hear it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to run through a little presentation here about flipping houses, and in the midst of this is going to be a little case study because I think people learn best, especially myself, by seeing examples rather than just talking about what to do. So before we do that, by a show of hands, who in here has ever flipped a house? Okay, maybe about half. Okay. Of those who haven't flipped a house, who's interested in potentially flipping a house? Okay, a good handful of the rest. Okay. Of all of you that are interested, and you may not want to raise your hand for this one, in flipping a house that haven't yet, how many of you have close to no money? We got a couple of honest people here. All right. Hand clap for you guys. All right. So whether you got a little bit of money or no money to start, or a lot, hope this helps. Well, first I want to mention, people ask me all the time, what's my why? What drives me? And this is it right here. 2 Corinthians 9:11 says, "You'll be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion, and through us your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God." And more so than my passions for real estate and the joy I get out of that, it's even so much more joyful to be able to be radically generous and to be in a position financially to be able to bless people whenever you see a need. All right, so we're going to start with a case study of the very first flip that I did. This was not the very first property that I bought. The first property I bought was a month before I bought this one, in which I intended for it to be a rental. And that was a bad deal, and knock on wood, my only bad deal to date. So, luckily, I bought this deal before I realized that first rental was a bad deal. So this one ended up being good, and it saved me, and we kept rolling. So this is a double-wide manufactured home in Rocky Point. So how I found the deal. So my wife and I, we would walk around the neighborhood all the time with the kids. We'd take them out in the strollers and stuff, and we would just every evening, maybe not in the hottest months in the summer, but we would just go on walks. And every day in the neighborhood, I saw this one double wide that looked like it was vacant. The mailbox was taped closed. There was an old rundown car in the back. The grass was grown up like 3 feet high. And so then, in conjunction to seeing that property over and over again and listening to Bigger Pockets and realizing what was possible, I made a Facebook post in our neighborhood Facebook group, and I said, hey, does anybody know who the owner of this house is? I'd love to see if they're interested in selling it. Well, nobody answered that question. However, the silver lining to that story is because I took that initiative and put in that little bit of effort, somebody actually private messaged me from the neighborhood and say, hey, I don't know the answer to your question, but we're about to move out of our house with our mother-in-law who's legally blind to help her. We can't afford 2 mortgages. Do you want to come look at this house? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Do you know what you'd want for it? And then that's when the negotiation started. Other ways you can find deals, wholesalers. If you don't know what a wholesaler is somebody that does all of these other things, or some of them, and actually finds the deal. They get the deal under contract as if they're the buyer, and then they assign that contract to an actual end buyer, house flipper investor like myself. So the wholesaler never has to have the money. They never actually buy the property. They're just assigning the right to purchase that property to the end investor, and in exchange, they receive what's called an assignment fee. So it's basically, they just get a finder's fee for finding the deal. And your average assignment fee is probably $5,000 to $10,000, but I've paid several $30,000+ assignment fees to wholesalers before, and I have a friend that actually wholesaled a 44-unit apartment complex last year in Fayetteville for over $700,000 assignment fee. So there's really no limit to what can be done. So you can use wholesalers, leverage them. It's harder to build their trust and get at the top of their buyers list if you're brand new. It might take a little bit of time and credibility, but one area that can help in particular is if you find the newer wholesalers, the brand new ones or the aspiring ones, if you have enough education that you know how to find deals and you can help them, you can either provide copies of assignable contracts, or you can help them comp properties, or you can help them estimate a rehab budget, whatever. You can provide value to them. When it comes time that they do actually find a deal, there's a really good chance that you're going to be their first chance at a potential buyer. And also, they don't yet have a giant list of buyers yet that you're going to have to compete with. So if you're not going through a wholesaler, you got to find the deal yourself. Probably the most common marketing method in the country is direct mail. It's boring, it's expensive, but it works. That's why you get all the junk mail from all the different marketing places all the time, every day. Even though all of us just take it and throw it right in the trash, there's somebody that's sitting in their house that they pick up that card and they read it, oh, okay, and they pick up their phone. So even though it's a very low response rate, it works. Cold calling, I don't have to explain that. Blast text campaigns, there's actually software that you can use to pull lists, and it will let you send out 1,000 text messages per day, and you just click one button and it just sends them all. And then you just filter through the responses that you get back from those sellers. That's one of the most popular or common methods that I have seen from the wholesaler friends of mine that are doing really well with it. SEO is just making your website set up to where you've got the keywords in place and the different blog posts and whatever else, to where when people make a search for, sell my house fast Wilmington, your website would naturally come close to the top of those results without having to, pay to be on the first page. And of course, you can pay to get up at the top of the sponsored ads. That's, pay per click. Then there's, of course, social media ads, Facebook, whatever. And if you've ever seen one of those, sell my house fast ads on Facebook, it's really, really saturated. If you click one of those ads, you're going to see 50 more of those ads for the next, week at least. So that's not to say it doesn't work. It does work, but there's a lot of people in that space right now. Billboards, radio ads, TV commercials. I mean, it's really, whatever method you can think of. At the end of the day, without marketing, you have no business. Without deals, you have no business. So you have to figure out which methods of marketing you want to go with and stick to it. And they all work. You just have to figure out what you want to do, what you have the time capacity to handle, and financially can invest to get it done. That's a billboard that I had last year for about 4 months. It actually generated a whopping 0 leads. Not a single phone call, not a single inquiry on the website due to the billboard, nothing. The only thing it may have helped with a smidge is brand recognition or credibility, because I could tell people that were on the other side of town that I know had to be passing that regularly. If I was going to sellers at an appointment, I could tell them, oh yeah, you might have seen our billboard right up at so-and-so. That's us. And then that gives an extra instant credibility. It's funny, as soon as I bought this billboard, and I just posted this picture on my personal Facebook page, and I had so many friends and family that were like, oh, congratulations, that's so incredible, man, you made it, that's so good. And I'm like, what are you congratulating me for? Spending money? Like, do you understand? Like, somebody literally a couple years ago paid money in Wilmington to put a picture of Joe Biden eating an ice cream cone on a billboard. Seriously, that's all it is just spending money. So, but it's interesting, I say that just to say that billboards mean something to people. Maybe because they are very expensive, if people see your name or your face on a billboard, they automatically assume that you're credible or professional enough to be able to afford a billboard. So where to start? How do you find these leads? How do you got to send out postcards and all that stuff. Well, where are you sending them? You have to start with a list. There's different ways that you can get this list. You can either create the list yourself or you can buy the list. So the way that you would create a list is doing what's called driving for dollars. And you would download an app. A cheap option is Landglide, or if you want one that can do a whole lot more inclusive, but it's more expensive, Deal Machine is another option. So you can, basically you just get in your car, drive around neighborhoods that you're interested in flipping houses in. You look for distressed properties. You look for, I would say more than just one thing wrong with it. Like if it needs a new roof, but it's perfectly manicured everywhere else, that's probably not going to end up on the list. But if it needs a new roof and the grass is, 12 inches tall, and the garage door is dented in at the bottom really far, okay, there's multiple signs of distress there. I'm going to add it to the list. So that takes time, though. When I did this a few years ago, on average, it probably took me somewhere around 30 hours of driving time to build a list of 1,000 properties, just for reference. So either you drive around, you spend your time driving, and by the way, this Land Glide option, that's at least last time I saw it, it's only like $10 a month, and there's no subscription. You can cancel it any time. So I would just download it for $10, build my list in less than a month, and then delete the app. And then when I needed it again, download it again. So finding ways to be cheap here, people. So the other option is you can purchase a list. So there's websites like ListSource, PropStream, Batch Leads, a bunch of others where you can go on to the website and you can search certain types of filters and you can stack these filters. So you can say, okay, I want you to show me a list of every home in 28409 that is non-owner occupied, meaning the owner doesn't live in the house, they live somewhere else. So it's either a vacation home or a rental, et cetera. And I want to see, high equity, which a lot of times just means they've owned the house for, 10 plus years. And I want to see all that are in pre-foreclosure. And the accuracy of that information varies depending on provider, but you can take these different filters and you can stack them on top of each other to narrow that list down to try to find the most potentially motivated sellers, and then you're able to start marketing to them. So now that you've got your list, what's next? Well, the question that I ask is, do you have more time or do you have more capital? If you have no time and you have more capital, you're out of luck. Hate to break it to you. If you've got more time, then you're going to do some of this stuff yourself. You might be doing the driving for dollars option, and then you're going to either go to Yellow Letter HQ and send postcards, or you may even hand write postcards or hand write letters, depending on the time and the budget that you're working with. You can cold call and text yourself, do some of these other options. I've done most all of them. I've door knocked pre-foreclosure leads before, and that's really fun, going to people's houses whenever they're about to lose their house and they're angry, and some of them have guns, and yeah, it's a good time. You should try it. So you can use a company like, so when you get this list, the list is just going to be basically, depending on where you get it from, for the most part, the most important information that's going to have is the property address and the owner's name and the owner's mailing address, wherever the owner actually lives. Those are the most important piece of information. It's not going to include the contact information, the phone number, the email addresses for these owners right out of the gate. You have to do what's called skip tracing to get that information. And there are plenty of providers out there. Batch Leads is a good example where you can upload your list, or you can use Batch Leads to buy the list first, and then you can pay, I think it's somewhere around 14 cents per record, and they will skip trace based off of all the public record they have access to. They will skip trace, and it will generate all of the contact phone numbers for those people. Now, we all know there's a million ways you could skip trace people's phone numbers a little bit more accurately online, but do you have the time to sit there and do that for 1,000 or 10,000 properties? No. You're better off letting one of these providers do it, even if you only land with 70 to 75% accuracy on the phone numbers. If you see other properties on there where the phone number was wrong, but you really like that property, well, then maybe take those little one-offs and skip trace them yourself and call them. So back to the case study. So what did I do first on the phone, or it was over Facebook Messenger? I qualified the lead. I asked what they were asking for the house. They told me they wanted $65,000 for this double wide. with the land, of course. And I knew, because I lived in the same neighborhood, that house, after renovations in livable condition at least, would be worth $120,000. So I knew in my head, okay, this house would have to need a pretty good amount of work for me to not want to do this deal. Let me pursue it and see. So I said, yes, let me let's schedule time to come look at it. And so I went and looked at the property, and I was able to negotiate the price down a little bit to $60,000. And one of the little tools I'll share with you that I used to do that was, what do you think about when you hear the term closing costs? Somebody throw out a number of what comes to mind when I say closing costs. 10K. 10K, thank you. Anybody else got a number that comes to mind? 1,500, okay. 1%, okay. So what most of these examples that we just heard are people's experiences of closing costs whenever they're buying a property and they're using a lender, and that lender has expensive underwriting fees and other processing fees, etc. So they're used to, okay, it's going to cost me, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 in closing costs. So what I did with this seller, and I can't tell you for sure what the seller was thinking or knew or didn't know. I don't want to assume. But what I told the seller, I said, would you be willing to do $60,000 if I cover all closing costs and there's no realtor commissions? And she said, as long as you'll cover all the closing costs and you'll help walk us through the process, because we've never sold a house without a realtor before, then we'll do the $60,000. Well, you want to know how much closing costs as a seller that the seller would have had to pay the closing attorney? About $250 to prepare the seller documents. So it's that extra perceived value by me offering to pay closing costs. She probably assumed that there were a lot more closing costs than what was. So the rehab budget on this property, I estimated it was going to be $10,000. It was very basic. It didn't need much at all. The after repair value I estimated at $120,000. So I knew based off of what I had learned that this was a good deal. So I went ahead and got it under contract. Now, before I talk about types of contracts real quick, let me get to this point of what makes a good deal. So I said that the $60,000 purchase plus $10,000 rehab I knew looked like a good deal based off of a resale value of $120,000. Well, generally speaking, what makes a good deal to most house flippers and most hard money and private money lenders that lend to house flippers is going to be something called the 70% rule. The 70% rule means that your total purchase price plus your rehab budget do not exceed 70% of the after repair value. So if you've got a property that's going to be worth $200,000, you know the most that you need to be all in from purchase and rehab should be $140,000. So if it needs $30,000 in rehab, the most you should be willing to pay is $110,000, which also of course means that if you were trying to wholesale it instead of flip it yourself, you need to get it cheaper than $110,000 so you can then assign it at $110,000 to a cash buyer. So there are plenty of exceptions to that. Once you get in that, $350,000 and above resale price point, that percentage-wise, that 70% rule isn't quite as applicable because you can get tighter on the margins percentage-wise, but still leave a juicy amount of profit dollar-wise as the sales price increases. And also, on occasion, if a property is in nearly perfect condition, if I don't have to do hardly anything to it at all, I can just paint it and then paint the inside and then relist it for sale, I'm probably going to be okay buying it for more than 70% rule. That doesn't mean that I try to pay more than 70% rule, but I'll probably be willing to. So, contract types. Anytime you're going to a seller appointment, always keep contracts in your truck with you or your car, whatever you drive. Keep several copies of printed contracts because you don't know if that seller's ready to sign right then and you tell them, okay, I'm going to run to the house and come back, or I'll come back tomorrow. It may be too late. They may have changed their mind. So when you're trying to get that under contract, you want those papers right there. That you don't want to have to say, okay, I'll send it via DocuSign when I get back to the office. No, you want to try to lock it up as soon as you can. So what type of contract to use? I keep two different types of contracts in the car with me at all times. One is the standard, North Carolina Realtors Association form. I'm using the 2019 version still, which is like 14 pages long, and I think the current version is like 17 or 18. It's ridiculous how much they keep adding to that. And I also have a simple one-page contract that I drafted myself that is assignable. So I've never wholesaled anything. I always buy them myself and flip them. But I like to have the option to, if just in case I needed to, just an extra backup exit strategy. But the standard North Carolina form has a clause in there that says that specifically says that it's not assignable unless agreed upon in writing by both parties. So if you're going to use that contract and you want to assign it, you need to have an addendum where they're agreeing to allow you to assign it. So what I do is I take both contracts to the seller. I say, okay, we can sign this obnoxiously long contract over here. That's the standard North Carolina one. Or we can sign this one-pager. You can review it all in about 30 seconds. Let me know if you're comfortable with it. Most of the folks do choose the one-pager. They're comfortable with it. However, there's still, probably at least a third of the sellers off market that are more comfortable going with the standard form because they know it's standard. They know that there's a higher likelihood of it protecting them. They know I didn't manipulate anything in the contract, so they just feel better with it. So always keep multiple options. So here's the fun part. I got this deal under contract, and I'm about to wet myself because I'm like, I have no money. I know nobody that has money. How am I going to fund this deal? The only reason I knew it was a good deal and I got it under contract was because of what I had learned from Bigger Pockets and other sources that I had later learned from. So I just start hitting the phones. I start calling hard money lenders in North Carolina everywhere I can find. And luckily I had already set up an LLC, which just as an FYI, hard money lender, due to certain banking regulations, they won't lend to you as a private individual. You need an LLC for them to lend to. So I had that already set up. That was fine. But also what I ran into is that most hard money lenders do not lend on manufactured homes. And that wasn't something that I had ever heard mentioned on any podcast or anything, so I just didn't know that. And so then I'm like, okay, well, this is making it even harder. So I call and I call and I call. Eventually, I found a hard money lender based out of Charlotte that even though I had no experience, it was my first flip, and it was a manufactured home, they loaned me 100% of the purchase price and the rehab cost, so the full $70,000, and it was on a 6-month term. It was expensive though. I had to pay 3.5 points up front, which is 3.5% of the total loan amount, and then a 12% annualized interest rate. So they gave me two different options. They said we can do a full doc loan or a no doc loan, which is exactly what it sounds like. For full doc loan, they're checking your credit, they're looking at your W-2, income, taxes, whatever, making sure that you can substantiate that payment if needed as well. No doc loan, they don't care anything about your financials. They only care about the property itself and is it worth what they need it to be worth. Not every hard money lender gives you the two different options. Some will only let you do one or the other. But with this lender, that was an option that I had. So even with them funding 100% of purchase and rehab, because of the 3.5% that I had to pay up front plus their other closing costs, I still had to come to the table to close with about $8,000. But what have we learned? I had no money, and I knew nobody that had money, or at least that wouldn't lend to me. So I actually leveraged my credit card to get the $8,000. So I think they've put ways in there to stop this from you being able to do this now. But back then, what I did was I took my Venmo account on my phone connected to my credit card and my wife's Venmo account, and I charged my credit card through Venmo to send my wife $1,000. So it charged me like $1,030 and sent her $1,000. And then I took her Venmo and sent it back to my Venmo account, and then I cashed it out of my Venmo account into my bank account. And I did that several times over the span of like a week before we closed. So we're getting creative here, folks. I have heard from somebody else recently that even though that type of thing is harder to do through the Venmos of the world, there's still a way supposedly to do it where you can use a credit card to buy cryptocurrency of some sort and then transfer that crypto to yourself on a different exchange and then cash it out into your bank account. I've not tried it, but just throwing it out there. So the one thing that's important to know with these construction type loans is that the rehab money that they loan you, they don't give it to you up front when you close. If they would have given me that $10,000 for the rehab up front, I wouldn't have had to come to the table with any money to close. So what they do is they put it on a draw schedule, where in this case, the rehab was only $10,000, so we just kept it on one draw of the full $10,000. So basically, they don't give me the $10,000 for the rehab until I'm already finished with the whole project. Well, how am I going to do that? I have no money, and I know no one with money. So, other ways that you can fund deals. You like that cliffhanger there? Yeah. Other ways that you can fund deals, you got your regular, boring types of financing, conventional stuff. If you got a lot of cash and you want to put 15, 20, 25% down on investment properties, go for it by all means. Private lenders, this just is anybody, could be your grandma, your grandpa, your cousin, whatever, just any individual. And this little acronym, SDIRA, stands for Self-Directed IRA. And what a lot of folks don't know is that if you have money in a retirement account, say at a job that you used to work for, and you're able to roll that over, you can roll that over into, if you got a traditional IRA or Roth IRA or solo 401k or SEP or whatever, you can roll those funds over into a self-directed IRA provider. And then instead of only being able to invest your money in stocks and bonds that provider gives you access to, the self-directed providers will allow you to loan that money out or even buy unique assets with it, such as real estate or gold, physical gold, or basically whatever you can think of, any type of investment, artwork, etc. So there's some weird, funky nuances with the ins and outs of those accounts that you need to learn about to do that. But point being, there are plenty of people out there that have a lot of money sitting in a retirement account, but maybe not a whole lot of extra disposable income somewhere that they could loan to you. But if they've got more than enough that they need, they're comfortable with the risk level where they would be willing to lend from an IRA on some of your projects, they can lend straight from their IRA to you or to your LLC, and then you would pay the IRA interest, which would go back into their IRA account. This next acronym, HELOC, it stands for Home Equity Line of Credit. That's just where if you've got a bunch of equity in your house that you're living in, and you can do it on some investment properties too, but that's a lot harder to get with lenders, especially these days. But basically, you got a lot of equity in the house that you're living in. You can go to lenders, and they will give you a line of credit collateralized by that property. And so even if you have a mortgage in place already, let's say you own a house that's worth $300,000, but you only owe $200,000. You've got $100,000 in equity in there sitting there doing nothing. Well, you can go and get a HELOC from a bank that they'll take a second position lien against that property behind your first mortgage, and they'll give you a line of credit against the property. And a line of credit works the same way as a credit card. You only are being charged interest as the money is out being used. And you can pay it back off just like a credit card and then take it back out. It's not a one-time loan and then done. It's an open line of credit you can keep using that's collateralized by your house. Now, most banks are only going to do a HELOC up to a combined LTV of 80%, meaning that your remaining mortgage balance plus, whatever the HELOC balance is, or not the balance, but the limit, doesn't exceed 80% of the current value. There are plenty that will go higher. I know Sharon View, Federal Credit Union, they do up to 90%. And Corning Credit Union in town actually does up to 100%. and they don't advertise that at all. You have to ask them for it, and your financials still need to be able to qualify for that increase, with the debt service. But if you can qualify, they'll give you up to 100% combined LTV to a maximum HELOC limit of $250,000. So that's a very, very powerful tool. If you've got a house with some equity in it, you can get a HELOC and maybe use that to take out your, use hard money to buy your first flip and use the HELOC to use $20,000 or $30,000 that you need to do some rehab, or until you get that drawback from the lender, and then flip it and then pay your HELOC back, and then you got your profits as well. Just obviously, if you're leveraging like that, obviously use caution, do it wisely. Only do it if it's a really good deal. There's very little risk, etc. Seller financing. I've got a 16-unit complex that was seller financed, where the seller came up with a great purchase price for us. He agreed to accept 8% down and 4% interest on a 26-year term with no balloon, which, if you don't know, in the commercial space, that's just ungodly. It's incredible. And needless to say, that property just cash flows like crazy. It's beautiful. So, seller financing is just instead of you paying the seller $300,000 cash for your house, you get the seller to agree to accept payments from you. When you close, the deed would actually go into your name. So you become the owner, but they become the lender, just like a bank. They get a deed of trust against the property, just like a bank would. They probably are also going to get a promissory note from you and a personal guarantee as well, if their attorney has any brains. So then they know that you're going to pay it back if something messes up with the actual property itself. So seller carryback is a little bit different, to where you go ahead and close on the property using whatever means you want, hard money, whatever. But then the seller agrees that after closing, they're going to loan you in a second position a portion of that back. So I've seen, actually I think it was Tim that spoke here not long ago. He bought a 24-unit property where he got the lender to agree to fund, let's just say 75%. And then, so he had to short-term find money to bring the 25% to the table. And then the seller agreed to carry back the other 25% in a second position. So he really got into that deal 100% leveraged with not much of his own money out of pocket. Subject 2 is a little bit different. I'm not really going to get into Subject 2 or novations. I'll just throw those topics out. If you're not familiar with them, go do some more research on them, because we don't have that much time tonight. So, how I renovated the property with no money. So I got a referral from a friend of mine that's a property manager for this handyman, and he happened to live in the same neighborhood as me. And I told this handyman, I'm like, look, here's the deal, here's the budget, it's on a draw schedule, but this project's going to be really quick. How do we work this out? And he's like, that's fine. He's like, you buy the material, and you can just pay me once you get that drawback, from the lender, because he understood how draw schedules work. And the job, I think it actually only took him 10 days to finish it. So he was fine not getting paid for a couple of weeks. And as far as buying the material, which I didn't have the money to afford either, I just put that on a credit card. So I just put $4 or $5 grand worth of material on a credit card, had the handyman agree not to get paid for a little while, and then as soon as we finished the rehab, I notified the lender. The lender sent somebody to take pictures to confirm that the work that I told them was going to get done got done, and then they released that $10,000 to me. So then I was able to pay the contractor his labor, pay back the material cost of the credit card, and we actually stayed on budget on this project, which is one of the only flips I've ever stayed on budget for. So it was very simple. As you can see, it was mostly, flooring, paint, some light fixtures, adding a backsplash and a dishwasher, and pressure washing the outside. That was basically it. And going back, if I'm looking at it now, I go back and look at those pictures of that product that I created, and I'm just completely embarrassed. I'm like, God, I should have done so much more to that property. But I didn't really know any better, and I was also just a little bit nervous about the risk involved, so I just wanted to get the rehab done as cheaply as I could without being one of those scummy flippers that's hiding stuff intentionally, you know. So here's some other ways to find contractors. You can do referrals from other investors and property managers, but don't take their word as gold. I learned the hard way. On that first property that I mentioned earlier that I intended to be a rental, I got burned by a contractor for $16,000 who was a referral to me from a different contractor that I did know was very good, but that contractor had worked with this one in the past and had good things to say about him. He connected us. I thought that was going to be okay, got completely ripped off. So do your own due diligence on the contractor. Don't take anybody's word for it. Active job sites, that's a very underrated method to find contractors. Just drive around town, look for the big roll-off dumpsters in the driveway with some trucks there, and just show up. Just go knock on the door and see who's there. Talk to the contractor, find out what they're working on. Ask if you can go in and see the work, see their quality of work. Ask them if they need more jobs. Obviously, the obvious answers, Google search, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, etc. One thing I'll say is, don't just write off the simple stuff like Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace because it seems so simple, or because you might at first have that assumption that, oh, well, if they were any good, they wouldn't need to be on Craigslist or Marketplace looking for more work. Yes, sometimes that's true, but sometimes they're just really bad at the business side of things, or they're bad at marketing, or maybe they don't speak that good of English, so getting business for them in America is a little more difficult. Or maybe they just moved here. I've seen that before, where there's some pretty good contractors or handymen that had a ton of business, more than they could handle, in the state that they just came from, but they just moved here a couple weeks ago and don't have a bunch of people knocking their door down to do projects yet. So, final outcome of this project, the total hold time was 5 months. Okay, anybody see a discrepancy there? Rehab budget was about 10 days. Why in the world did I hold it for 5 months?
Time to sell it. Season.
Not quite. I bought this. This was listed for sale January 1st of 2020.
COVID.
There you go. COVID. It was very nice to me. So we got this property under contract fairly quickly, and COVID happened. And I don't remember exactly what happened with the first buyer. Somebody lost a job or something. They had to back out. We get it under contract a second time. A few weeks go by. Same thing happens. We get it under contract a third time, and it almost fell through again a third time. We were barely able to salvage it because one of the two buyers on that third contract actually did lose her job as well. And so we thought, we're going to have to get this thing sold a fourth time just to move it. And if I go past my 6-month term with my hard money lender, I might have to pay another 2 points to them to buy another 90-day extension, which obviously eats into your profits. So luckily, third contract, we got it closed, and the sale price was $125,000, but with $5,000 in seller concessions, which is right about what I expected it to sell for. It sold to an FHA buyer, which had a couple extra expenses come up that I had to cover with some foundation stuff, which is normal on these with FHA buyers in particular. And so at the end of the day, the total points up front plus the interest over the 5 months that I paid to that hard money lender was right around $11,000. And my net profit after paying the hard money lender and the contractor and everything else was paid back, my net profit was a little over $26,000 on this first flip. So one thing I get asked all the time is, well, why don't you keep some of these properties that you're flipping? How do you know to hold them or to flip them? And if you're not familiar with the term BRRRR, it's B and 4 R's. It's a popular term in the real estate world these days. It stands for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, and repeat. And the whole gist of it is, You buy it with short-term money, you do a little bit of rehab, you put a tenant in there, then you go back to a regular bank that's going to give you a longer-term loan. You refinance it with them. If you do it right, you're getting all your purchase and rehab money back out in the refinance. And then ideally, you have none of your own money left in that deal, and you've got a property that might cash flow $100 or $200 a month after paying everything else. Well, with manufactured homes in particular, you can't get an investment property loan on a manufactured home. You can sell them to a buyer that's buying it with financing as their primary residence all day long, no problem. And I flip a lot of these, and every single person that's buying them is buying it for their primary residence. So even if I wanted to hold that, I couldn't have, unless I had some other source of money that I could have paid that hard money lender off, and then I wanted to keep all my cash tied up forever, then I had to sell it. That was about my only exit strategy. So, but what about the stick-built houses? What about the bigger houses that I flip, the stick-built houses, the brick houses, etc.? Why do I not hold those? And I didn't mention yet that my entire business model from the beginning has been to flip single-family houses and buy and hold commercial multifamily houses or properties. And the biggest reason for that is ROE, which stands for return on equity. So I'm a numbers nerd. I went to UNCW for finance. I was a licensed financial advisor for a short period and then an institutional trust officer. So numbers, spreadsheet, taxes, I'm a nerd for that kind of stuff. So when I just tell people, I just do what the numbers tell me to do. And at least in our market, when you look at the comparison of resale prices to rent that you can get, a lot of times I'm looking at, okay, let's say I flip a stick-built house in North Chase. Well, maybe I've got $80,000 in equity in it by the time I'm done flipping it. Well, I could either BRRRR and refinance and hold that property, and especially with rates as high as they are right now, if I'm lucky, I may cash flow $100, $150 a month. We're talking about pure cash flow, like after taxes, insurance, repairs, maintenance, management, saving for the larger capital expenditures down the road, like your HVAC, your roof replacement, like pure net cash flow would probably only be $100, $150 a month if I did that. Well, let's look at what's the alternative. Okay, let's say I sell the house, I pay some realtor commissions, some closing costs, and let's say maybe instead of $80,000, I'm walking away with $60,000. Now that doesn't include any tax implications. If you had heavy tax implications and weren't buying more real estate to help offset those taxes, you would need to take more into account the taxation of the sale, of course. But in this instance, the taxes aren't as much of a concern because I know I'm buying more real estate that's going to help me offset that. So what's my alternative of holding it and cash flowing $100 a month? Well, I can sell it and then maybe I walk away with $60,000. Well, do I think that $100 a month, call it $1,200 a year, is a good return on $60,000? I don't. It's, 2.5% return on my equity, something like that. Well, I know for sure I can do way better, get way better returns by taking that $60,000 and putting it towards a down payment on a multifamily property where I'm going to get a much higher percent, triple, double, or more return on that equity. So, last thing I want to leave you guys with is this little piece of motivation, which the slide is a little bit outdated here. So, a few years ago, I bought a single-wide trailer on land in Leland from a wholesaler for $15,000. No idea how he got it cheap enough to do that. I assume he just thought that the value was only like what a used trailer by itself would be worth without the land. I'm not really sure. But I bought the house for $15,000 using somebody else's money because I didn't have the $15,000. And only 4 months later, I came across this 8-unit deal in Burgaw, which is they're all 2-bed, 2-bath units, about 1,000 square foot apiece with washer dryer connections. It's a 2000 build with only a 3-year-old roof. Beautiful property. And I found this from handwritten letters. I just made a list of like the 30 or 40 multifamily owners in Burgaw because there's not very many. And I just wrote handwritten letters to all of them and sent them out. And these folks happened to be going through a divorce at the time. I was able to negotiate a price with them of $450,000, and the property didn't need anything. All I did when I bought it was reseal and stripe the parking lot, and that's it. But what I got the seller to do, to agree to, is I told the seller, I said, hey, I've got another property over here that I would really love to be able to sell and 1031 exchange into this one, but if I can't make that work, I have another way I can still get it closed on time. But with that said, would you mind if we set the closing out for 3 months to give me plenty of time? And he said, yeah, I understand exactly what you're trying to do. No problem. Let's go ahead. So I already had this property under contract to buy 3 months later before I even started trying to sell this one. So then I get this under contract. I tried to see if I could pay the tenant cash for keys so I could get them out and then clean it up and sell it at market price, which at that time would have been maybe around 120 or so. But I couldn't. I couldn't get that tenant out. And so I ended up selling it to a cash buyer. Believe it or not, a guy in Leland that had just won a $2 million lottery. Right, he just bought the nicest thing on the block, I guess. So, which, by the way, should be to no one's surprise, that guy within like a year had already burned through all of his money and has sold all of those assets that he bought. But anyway, that's not relevant. So I did end up selling this to that cash buyer for $98,000, roughly 7 months after I had bought it. And I didn't put any money into that either. So the difference of that profit, I did a 1031 exchange, rolled that as my down payment, the 20% down for this $450 purchase, which at the time that I bought it, that property was probably worth somewhere around $900,000. And I even a few months later got an unsolicited offer from an agent, a broker in charge out of Hampstead that had some 1031 money coming, that he offered me $900,000 for it just a few months after I bought it, and I turned it down. Well, so the current rents when I bought it were like an average of about $675 or so. Market rents were around $850, and this was only a little over 2 years ago. Right now, these units are renting for $1,200 a piece. This property is probably now worth around $1.2 million, maybe a little bit more. So I only owe $340,000, $350,000 on a $1.2+ million property that now is net cash flowing around $4,000 a month. So in less than a year's time, took a loan from somebody else for $15,000 and turned it into almost $1 million in equity that's cash flowing $4,000 a month. That's what's possible.